and this will be recorded so you can view it again and reference it later. Welcome everyone to putting your IBM security on the offensive with pen testing. So we're going to focus on the IBM and pen testing today. My name's Amy Williams. I'm a senior consultant within the security services group for Fortra. I've been working on the IBM platform. We figured out just over 30 years in some capacity. So started out as a user and worked my way up, and I've been an administrator for over 14 years running my own shops. And then for the last 11, I've really focused all of my attention on security on the IBM. So why do pen testing at all? And why should you pen test your IBM? There's many reasons that come to mind, not only to prevent a breach, to prevent loss, to keep your data secure, but adherence to regulatory requirements, avoiding those costs of a breach and recovery. Today, threats against our data are coming at us at nothing less than an alarming rate. And whether they're stemming from inside our firewalls or outside our firewalls, we need to be able to take the appropriate actions and precautions to try and prevent them and ensure that the precautions and the configurations that we're putting in place are actually working as hard for us as we mean for them to. So IBM does have a reputation as one of the most secure platforms out there. And if you've been working on the IBM for any length of time, hopefully you've experienced the ability for the system to be secure, but that's not how it's shipped. It is a system that provides you the ability to have exceptional security. They provide a lot of built-in features that can be taken advantage of to make sure that that system is one of the most secure systems that you have. But that doesn't happen without a little bit of assembly. So you get this great system and it gets shipped to you with all these great defaults. Well, it's shipped to you to work and it works great. And you've got connectivity and you've got access to everything. But to make that system secure, you've got to take those steps to change those defaults, to make those configuration improvements, to ensure that now it's not only just working and providing all of that accessibility to your applications, to your customers' data, but also that it's limiting the access to only those who need it. And when I talk about defaults, during our IBM security study, the respondents came back and there were still 30% of the respondents that were running at a security level of less than 40 or 50. Level 20 and 30 are built with many, I would say, disadvantages to security. At level 20, profiles by default are built with all object security. You're an administrator right out of the gate if you don't take steps to change that. And at level 30, there are ways to take advantage of elevated profiles that you haven't been granted specific authorities to. So taking those things into account right out of the gate, you're at a disadvantage because those vulnerabilities exist. At level 40, not only are user profiles not built with all object out of the gate, you can't take advantage of a user profile unless you've been explicitly granted authority to it. But it also brings in integrity checking for programs. So after compile time, if a program object has been tampered with, that can be identified at restore time. Or you can run an integrity check across all of your programs on the platform. At 20 and 30, these things aren't available to you yet. So in thinking about this and defaults, default passwords are probably one of my biggest challenges that I come across when I'm working with customers, and getting those updated and getting them away from all of the defaults that are shipped with either applications or with the system itself. When we looked at the data that came back from the study, we found that on average, 83 profiles were enabled with a default password on those systems. And these were systems of all shapes and sizes, anywhere from thousands of users to only a couple of hundred. So when we talk about default passwords, where the password is the same as the user profile, those profiles also had all sorts of special authorities. So when we mix these together and we look at how many profiles on average had all object authority, it was quite often that those all object profiles, one or two of those had a default password. And as soon as you have all object on IBM system, you can acquire all the rest of the special authorities. Did an exercise to prove this out for a customer a few months back, where all they granted us was all object authority and wanted us to prove that we could acquire the rest. It only took a few minutes and we were able to acquire all 8 special authorities. So when you're looking at your special authorities, when you're looking at your user profiles, really take into account and look at what the purpose of that profile is, the purpose of that person's job, and how often they need that elevated authority. I would also argue that we need to start looking at job control and spool control more often. For years and years, job control and spool control was handed out to every user profile. I know in many of my installations, when I started out as an administrator, by default, I was granting spool control and job control because I thought that's what users needed. It turns out now I've been able to find better ways to allow users to have access to not only their spooled output, but if they do need access to other spooled output, to give them that access without having to grant them access to the entirety of the system. With job control, they can end any system, job, any service running on the, on the system. That includes QSys work, any of the subsystems. With job control, you don't need any other special authorities and you can end those jobs. That can be impactful when somebody shuts down QSys work in the middle of the day and no one can connect to your system anymore. Speaking from experience, it's not a really fun time to recover from. So there are more important special authorities that can absolutely cause and allow for more damage to be created, but I would argue that all of them truly need to be evaluated. So when we go outside of just IBM and we look at all pen testing across the world, we did a survey of pen testers all over the world and asked what was their driving reason for doing pen testing. And 69% of the respondents say that their risk assessment and their remediation prioritization planning was the reason that they were doing pen testing. When organizations pen test for multiple reasons, one of the largest paybacks that they can get is that feedback loop so that they can build those remediation plans and be able to prioritize the things that are making them the most vulnerable. So again, think about penetration testing as part of your security plan and being able to truly evaluate what's going on in your systems, what's truly vulnerable, and what's going to get you the best payoff for the effort that you're putting forward. And when I ask customers this, how important their data is, very often I will get a response that's less than urgent. They don't consider their data very important. They don't take into account how that data is affecting the rest of their organization. And I would want to challenge you on that thought process. That data that's in your IBM very often is the core ERP system. It has your customer's contact information. It has your sales strategies. It has how you're going to market. If you lose access to that data, or that data is shared outside of your organization, how damaging can that be to your company? And no longer with the IBM are we able to just rely on menus and application security. ODBC, DDM, FTP, SSH, these have all allowed the IBM to become interconnected with the rest of our networks. It has become another server in the infrastructure and is just as accessible as any of the others. So when you think about this, your application security doesn't care about ODBC. Your menus aren't being accessed through ODBC or FTP or DDM. All of that security, all of that logic that gets built into those applications is completely bypassed and completely ignored by all of these access paths. So when we talk about how do we protect ourselves from this, we start building walls. We build network firewalls, we build software firewalls, we start restricting permissions, and we still rely on application logic. So when we're building those, we need to, again, take into consideration, who are we allowing in? What are we allowing them to do when they come in? Do we know that the application logic is being considered across all of the different entry points? When we're restricting permissions, are we restricting them down by individual users, by job classes, by roles? All of these things will be able to be tested through that pen testing program. You can verify that your software firewalls are working the way they're supposed to, that your network firewalls are preventing accesses from places they shouldn't be accessed from, that permissions have been restricted in the correct way, and within your applications, people aren't able to access options and functionality that they aren't supposed to. And I will go to the last piece, most importantly, knowing who has access to your systems. Doing a full audit, reviewing your configurations, ensuring that you know who has access to your systems. There are still ways to configure anonymous access on the IBM I, and I would challenge you to find out if this access is still being used. If you're widely using file shares, you would be surprised at how many customers still have anonymous access for file shares allowed in their environment. So we're at kind of a turning point in the presentation. I'd like to do a quick poll question and see where everybody is at with their pen testing. So we'll leave that up for about a minute, give everyone a chance. When we're talking about pen testing, you can include it, your vulnerability scans. If this is done on a regular basis, if you're thinking about it. Looks like got a pretty good turnout. We'll leave that up for a few more seconds. Appreciate everybody's answers. Looks like we've so looking at the poll results, 60% of you say that your IBM I is not being included in the vulnerability or the penetration testing. 10%, that's great. You're moving forward. It's always exciting to see that. And then 30%, you're just not sure. And that is a myriad of reasons that sometimes you're not aware of it or even given those results if it is happening. So if we go to when we should pen test, now that we've talked about if you're pen testing, pen testing is truly the testing of those controls that you've put in place and making sure that they're working as hard for you as you intended. And you'll hear me say that a few times because it really is at the core of the goal of pen testing to help you improve your security posture, to help ensure that misconfigurations are getting corrected, that known vulnerabilities are being patched, and that you're identifying these things in a timely manner to ensure that your infrastructure has the best standing and the best chance possible. Having confidence in the controls and the configurations is a good place for you to start, but proving that they're working for you is just priceless. So what should you be testing in these pen tests? Web applications, your network, infrastructure, your cloud, and physical access. And sometimes we forget about that physical access because we've got remote data centers. We don't see our systems every day. We're not touching them like we used to. But don't discount ensuring that the physical access to your systems, whether they're hosted on site with your own location, or if it's a third party and you have a remote data center, ensure that those physical securities are being accounted for also. Web applications, networks, those are not only included in vulnerability scans, but you can also do specific pen testing against those. And then I would say infrastructure and cloud, just because you've moved to the cloud, like the IBM I, the cloud is built to work and it is built to be integrated with all other systems and be accessible. Take the steps to ensure that your cloud systems are being secured, both the external perimeter and the systems themselves. There are vulnerabilities lurking in every configuration, in every hybrid deployment out there. So ensure that you're looking for those opportunities to make things just a little bit less accessible. So who performs these penetration tests? Pen testing is typically going to be performed by testers known as ethical hackers. These are IT experts who use methods similar to the attackers out there, and their true goal is to help you get to the most secure configuration as possible, to identify those possible entry points into your infrastructure, expose those vulnerabilities so that you can patch them, really to help you not take for granted the security posture that you have today. Improving your station, improving the way that you have your systems configured is really the goal of any good pen testing team and company. So who are these ethical hackers? They could be internal resources, external resources, and then I would go so far as to say you should be rotating what that scope is of these different resources, what their focus is, what they're testing, to keep everyone taking a fresh look at what they're testing, taking a fresh look at your infrastructure, being able to get different perspectives of possibly the same vulnerabilities or the same attack paths by different pen testers. They're going to be able to bring different things each time. And continuing that feedback loop that I've talked about before is your way to get that constant improvement of your security posture, of your configurations. If you've got the same tests being run against the same vulnerabilities, against the same servers, against the same infrastructure, and you're doing that every single time, you're likely going to continue to get the same results. But if you start changing that up a little bit, if you start changing the scope and who's doing those tests, you might find that you find a little bit different results each time. And hopefully those results continue to improve. So there's different ways that these pen tests can get conducted. You've got automated scans, you've got scripted testing. So the scripted testing could be anything from phishing attacks to privilege escalations, just validating vulnerability scans of vulnerabilities that were identified. All of these things can help with that skills gap if you're building your own internal pen testing team. So both internal resources and external third parties, when they're evaluating if automated testing is going to provide that same confidence level in your configuration alone, as opposed to also including a human tester, understanding that scope and the goal of the testing is really crucial, because you cannot have a successful pen test engagement, in my opinion, without including human testers. Human testers are going to be able to do more complex tests than the scans, than the automated scripts. Because when they get that feedback from the tests that they're doing, they're going to be able to make changes to their attack plan, make changes to their path that they're going down. They might be able to identify other vulnerabilities that weren't found in the initial reconnaissance that was done for the pen test engagement. So including human pen testers along with automated scans is going to give you a really true integrated testing that's going to give you the best feedback, the most comprehensive feedback, than just doing one or the other. So we've talked about who the pen testers are. We've talked about that they're referred to as ethical hackers, that they could be internal or third party. What I haven't mentioned, and I'm sure you've been waiting for, is the red team, blue team, and now one of the newer terms, purple teams. So a red team will serve as an attacker in a simulation as the pen test is happening, using those same techniques and tools that the hackers use to evade detection and test the defense readiness of the internal security team. Where the blue team is being tasked with detecting the adversaries. So they're trying to catch that red team in what they're doing, taking steps to prevent them from going further into the network, demonstrating that they were able to identify the attack was in progress, and then being able to take both of those sets of results. And I'm gonna say it again, this is my term this week is really that feedback loop, because it's all about improvement. This journey to a secure hardened system is never ending. You don't get to harden a system and then walk away and say, yep, I'm done. It's good. Because next week, I promise you, there will be another 0 day. There's going to be another vulnerability that we didn't know about this week. There's going to be a new patch that's got to be put on those systems. So realize that this is a continuing journey that is leading to improved security on all of your systems. And when you have that good feedback loop, you're not having red teams versus the blue teams, but rather one large team that's focusing on the one overarching goal, and that's improving your security posture on all of your systems. So with that, have another question for you. And this will be for those that are aware of the pen testing that's occurring just overall within your company, within your business, or your team. How often are you aware of that pen tests are being conducted, even if they don't include your IBM today? We'll leave this up for a few more seconds. Super. So looks like everybody has put in their answers. I'll leave it up for a few more seconds here. We'll see where everybody's kind of at. All right. So it looks like we've got kind of across the board annually, twice a year, and monthly, all about the same. And then 70% of you just aren't sure when that's happening. And that's all right. Hopefully we're giving you enough information today that you can go back and encourage your teams and your security teams, your IT department, whoever's responsible, to start incorporating pen tests into your planning. So annually is good. Twice a year, I find that's more driven by regulatory. Monthly, likely you guys have a good process in place that's starting that feedback loop of continuous improvement. So our best practice recommendations for when you should be doing pen testing is quarterly. So you guys were all around that quarterly time frame, which is great. Some were more often, some were a little less. And the reason that we go with quarterly, as well as any time there's a significant change to your infrastructure, and when I refer to significant changes, when we're talking about IBM, migrating to a new server, upgrading your OS, going to new hardware, installing a new application on your systems. Any of these types of activities could call for an additional pen test to be conducted, so to keep your awareness of any new vulnerabilities that those new configurations may have brought in to the systems. New applications that you haven't worked with before, upgrades to applications, right? Applications patch, do upgrades, ensure that they haven't introduced any new vulnerabilities, any new attack points that could be vulnerable and be taken advantage of by bad actors. And I know this probably sounds like I'm asking you to do this every day. I'm not. But remember that the threat actors are testing you every day. They're out there, they're looking for any way in, and they don't have any time constraints on them. So they're not going to just give up because it's 5 o'clock and it's time to, shut down and walk away for the day. They will be testing you 24/7. So running too few tests isn't ideal, but also running daily or weekly is going to overwhelm your teams and become impractical, because you do require that time to do the improvements, to implement those changes. And when your resources are already scarce, and we're talking about time, budget, and talent, to not only run the tests, but then also perform those remediations. So finding that good balance, finding your ability to not only run the pen tests on a regular cadence, but being able to implement those changes, being able to implement those improvements to your configurations is really important. So when we ask pen testers out in the world, and these were responses across the globe, those that were running monthly or even the quarterly tests, so 12% were running monthly and 20% were running quarterly, those we find are more likely for having that testing and retesting, putting in the remediation steps without putting that strain on their resources. When you start getting too frequent, especially if you're on a small team, you're constantly getting the report and constantly being told what's broken, but you're not getting the opportunity to actually fix it and then retest. So creating that feedback loop. I told you I was going to keep saying it. I'm hoping you guys hold on to it by the end of the presentation. But creating that feedback loop, that continuous process of improvement, is going to help you get your systems more secure on a continual basis. So let's talk about the different types of pen testing engagements. So you have black box, gray box, and white box. And I'm sure many of you have heard about the black box testing type. So this is truly where no information is provided other than who the target is for the testing team. So that timeline is going to be extensive because of the reconnaissance. They're going to attempt social engineering attacks to acquire credentials. They're going to scan your social media. They're going to scan your company websites. They're going to try and identify who they need to try and attempt to compromise so they can get access to your systems. All of these things will be done. And again, there will be that feedback loop, but the timeline on these is long-term, so the goals for these are usually much broader. When we talk about white box, it's just like it says, it's the opposite. So it is complete transparency. The testing team is provided reporting, providing network maps, given credentials. They're basically handed the keys to your network to be able to validate vulnerabilities that were either already identified or identify new vulnerabilities. So that timeline is usually much shorter because the reconnaissance is shorter. They're going to be using those provided reports, but they will be doing additional scanning of the network. It could include some social engineering, but generally the white box tests don't include those. So then we'll talk about gray box testing. And we talk about gray box, this is, like it sounds, right in between that white and black box test. So some information will be provided to those pen testers. Could be the IP ranges, could be the names of the servers, possibly and most likely will include credentials, right? All these things to shorten that timeline. But a gray box will also often include social engineering. They will include specifically scoped attempts to acquire elevation, to acquire credentials, and acquire access to specific servers. So scoping is really important when you're talking about these things. So what to expect when you're engaged with the pen testing team, and you will see that these stages are broken down anywhere from 3 stages to 7 stages. I've kind of come to the middle at 5. So we'll walk through these. So we've got the reconnaissance, which I've talked about a little bit already, but either using native commands, various tool sets, reports that are provided by the customer, basic data gathering about all of the environment as inclusive as possible is done. And then when all that data is gathered, the evaluation begins. So this is when that data gets broken down and different vulnerabilities are identified, possibly categorized, so you can start breaking it into those different classifications for attack vectors. And then that's when the assessment piece of that data, right? So now I know all the default settings that are out there. I know all the CVEs that I identified through my vulnerability scan. I know the different server and OS types that they've got running out there. So I build that entire testing plan from that broken down data from the reconnaissance. And of course, this is the part that everybody always talks about, the exploitation phase. So now I've actually taken all those vulnerabilities found, all those identified attack paths, and now I'm putting them into use, right? I'm going to attempt, as that pen tester, to exploit any of those known vulnerabilities in a safe way, right? This is an approved, agreed upon engagement. This is not where I'm going to, try and bring down your systems. The pen testers should not be attempting to damage your infrastructure in any way, but they are going to attempt to identify not only that the vulnerabilities that were listed out are vulnerable, but also possibly non-obvious opportunities that weren't in the data that they originally collected. And then I would say that the most important part of any pen testing engagement is going to be the reporting. And that reporting should not only include everything the pen testers did during that entire engagement, but it should also provide you guidance on how to prevent those vulnerabilities from being taken advantage of again. This is part of that feedback loop. This is that continual improvement. So when you're evaluating the scope of a pen test engagement, when you're evaluating what that result set looks like, make sure that you're getting the feedback to help you continue to improve. If you're just being told that you're broken, if you're just being told what vulnerabilities are out there without guidance, you might want to look at trying to improve those result sets so that they do include guidance on how to improve. So I've got another question in regards to how we're all working with our security. And if you have either state regulatory, new bills are being introduced all the time, if you have to apply HIPAA regulations or PCI. So if you're under any of those regulatory, I know that my background is in gaming, so that is a whole other version of regulatory standards that have to be observed. Banking has their own set states. Government works on a whole other level. Looks like we have a few more seconds here. I'll go ahead and close that. So 33% of you looks like are having to observe some sort of regulatory standards for your security. Some of these standards, PCI introduced new requirements this last year, requiring new pen testing standards and frequency. I know that gaming had these introduced this last year. So it's interesting to see that actually 22% of you don't have regulatory guidance or laws that you're having to abide by. Not an environment I was able to experience, so that would be interesting. So when we asked what that effect of compliance, right, making the checkbox, had on pen testing frequency around the world, with an increase in the number of data protection and security laws and regulations, the pen test needs surrounding that compliance seems to continually be growing. So at 41% of those respondents, they've actually increased the number of overall tests in response just to these mandates. And I briefly mentioned it, but in 2022, almost every US state put forward a cybersecurity bill of one level or another. So how important are penetration testing initiatives in relation to your compliance initiatives? So though there was a decline from last year, so we can see in 2022 it was 71%, 62% this year, still 93% of those that responded are showing that compliance is either somewhat or very important in their pen testing initiatives. So I'll ask again, why should you pen test your IBMI? Because there are bad actors out there. There are people that want your data, and if you don't value it, they do. So what is the number one concern out there? Ransomware and phishing are the top concerns of pen testers out there that could be compromising your system. And if we ask about the IBMI and you think it's secure, it's not. A traditional virus may not infect an IBMI native object, so your programs, your physical files, your queries, but realize that as soon as you have a share out there, that share is just like any other network share. And the viruses don't care. The ransomware doesn't care. It will carry those viruses. It will hold on to them for you. It is a fantastic place for these things to land. So while the IBMI native objects may not be able to be infected, the IBMI IFS is absolutely vulnerable to these. So the viruses may not be able to execute within the IFS. However, if we're talking about ransomware, that ransomware can rename, delete, encrypt the files on an IFS share just as easily as it can to any of your NAS shares or any of your other Windows shares. So using tools to prevent these attacks from happening, or at least limiting the effect they have in your systems, we do provide PowerTech antivirus that now has anti-ransomware technology included. So it will detect, listening on that file server exit point, any anomalous activity that's obviously not a human taking a file, renaming it, moving it, but where hundreds of files are getting renamed, deleted, encrypted, copied, encrypted, deleted. These types of activities will get identified and we'll build a rule in real time and prevent that connection from continuing to take any actions on the IFS. So during the IBMI security study, we asked and looked and saw how many systems actually had exit points in place, virus protection in place, and only 13% did. So remember that you've got these PC interfaces that have now exposed your IBMI to all the rest of your infrastructure, and none of them take into account your menus, that command line limitation, or any of your application security logic. So when you talk about your perimeter, our exit point manager tool will allow us to prevent unauthorized access through those different entry points. If users should only be coming in through your 5250, we can prevent them from using FTP, from being able to use DDM, or from using remote commands. So when we look at how many people actually have all the exit points implemented with protective programs, whether those programs were configured or not, couldn't tell you, but only 3% even had programs in place. And when we talk about pen testing and the different types of pen testing, year over year, the biggest growth was in internal threats, both unintentional and intentional. This means that people are starting to realize that the threats aren't all coming from outside the firewall. Your firewall is not the end-all, be-all to protect your systems. So how do you know what's going on in your systems? Reporting on that, feeding those items to a SIM are important windows into the activity happening on your systems, both the good and the bad. So event auditing, again, only 19% of the systems surveyed had auditing even turned on. And if you're not sure what auditing is or what auditing you should turn on, or if you have exit points configured, if you've just inherited a shop and you're trying to figure out where you're at, a really great way to start and figure out where you're at, a quick view of your overall security. So this is a 30,000-foot view. It's our free security scan that you can run against your IBMI LPAR. Take less than 30 seconds. And this will allow you to see very quickly, basically where your system's at. Now, if you want to do a deeper dive, if you know where you're at and you want to improve it, or if you think you're pretty good and you want to really get into the nitty-gritty, we offer a deep dive risk assessment service that'll go into the dark depths of your system and evaluate over 150 different data points for you. And we do offer penetration testing services on your IBMI. So I'm going to end there and throw up one last poll of, now that you've listened through all this, what's your next step going to be? And let us know. I appreciate that you guys hung in there with me through the whole thing. I do have on these last few slides the resources that I reference quite often in the presentation. So both our security scan and the 2023 penetration testing survey, both of those guides are available for you to download and observe. So I've got the links in the presentation that'll be available in the recording. And again, I appreciate your time. I hope everybody has a great afternoon, and thank you for coming.